Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and we're going to do now a season 1 overall review of Star Trek Picard. As everybody I'm sure knows, this is the 7th series in the ever-going Star Trek franchise, following the original series. We then of course had Star Trek Generation, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, then Voyager, then Enterprise, and then of course most recently Star Trek Discovery. And of course Star Trek Picard follows the continuing adventures of the title character, who of course was the iconic captain of the Next Generation, and it has Patrick Stewart reprising his role, and we pick up the story 20 years after the events set in Star Trek Nemesis, which resulted in one of the crew commander, Data, basically sacrificing his life for Jean-Luc Picard to live. So when we pick up the story, we see Jean-Luc Picard living out the rest of these days in a very kind of expansive, very technological, peaceful setting vineyard, and he has two Romulan carers looking out for him, and he's just reminiscing about his last remaining days of Data. We see at the beginning he's having these various dreams of Data painting, and they're on a ship and they're playing chess together, and over the course of the season we see Picard establish various connections of beings and races connected to Data, and then we have a whole alternate story when we're talking about what happened with the Romulans in terms of their planets being destroyed and Romulan refugees, and then we have the Borg getting involved, and then we also have synthetic beings and the threat that they pose and possess throughout the storyline. So that's the kind of general overview of what Star Trek Picard is like. So we're just going to delve more into the spoilers of the series now and talk about what was good about the series and then what was bad about the series, and just give an overall score. So if you haven't seen Star Trek Picard, you probably want to tune out now, watch the series, come back and watch this season review afterwards. So spoilers in 3, 2, 1. So we're going to go over the good points. Now obviously the first one and the most obvious is Patrick Stewart himself in the lead role. And I can remember when we saw the announcement that they were going to do a Picard series and we started seeing some of the trailers and the footage, I think one of the main concerns, because Patrick Stewart being at 80 years old, would he still have enough energy and enough verve to be able to portray a good enough performance for Jean-Luc Picard, who is one of the favourite captains amongst many fans because he's much more of an idealistic, principled character, whereas someone like Kirk was more action driven, and I would say Sisko was more emotionally driven. I would say Picard strived more on his speeches and his principles and what he felt was right, and his job was really to collate people together and convince them on a kind of theory level and thematic level on what was right and what was wrong. And you know, any character that you have can make speeches and kind of convince people in a non kind of active violent way is always going to command your respect. So that's why I feel people a lot, they liked the character of Jean-Luc Picard, right? And Patrick Stewart still has that gravitas and that screen aura and charisma about him, and I think his performance was critical, particularly in the first couple of episodes when the series is still trying to work itself out and what's its story and where it's going. Patrick Stewart is kind of the glue that keeps everything together, and he's the main reason you're still kind of watching. If it was another character that they focused on, I don't think you'd be compelled to watch as well. So Patrick Stewart's performance was key, particularly in the early episodes. And I think what happened later on, which I'll talk about in the bad section, is how his role kind of diminished and he didn't feel as important later on. But certainly in the first part of this show, Patrick Stewart's performance was very key. So the next good point was the obvious one, being the production. And as we know, I think Star Trek Picard has the same budget or close to the same budget levels of Star Trek Discovery, which is, if you watch that show, you could see the budget and the expenses spent on that show. You know, look at all the visual aesthetic, the production, the CGI, the effects, you know, and that feeds in the same way as Star Trek Picard, right? You know, all of the kind of set designs and the spaceships designs and the kind of laser effects. We see everything from the Romulan fleets and the fleet of star fleets that we see later on. You know, the very infamous space orchids defined by the synthetic planet. You know, although they do get a bit chaotic later on, the kind of design and, you know, lots of colours and expanding the screen across, it all looks visually very pleasing, right? So that's always going to be the case when you have something on with a production on this level, right? So everything from the kind of the sounds, and again just the kind of, it's got a HD filtered, very shiny, glossy feel to it. Again, very similar to Star Trek Discovery. And other shots include, we see the ball cube where it's coming out from portals, or whether it's crashing down on planets, all visually very stunning to look at. So you'd expect that kind of production value with a budget this size. So from a physical standpoint, the producers, they put a lot into the show, and you can always appreciate that. And I think it's always great if you want to have Star Trek continue into, like, if you're like a modern day era, it has to, for me, have a very modern kind of visual look about it. And I think this show did that very well on there. So I think another plus point, and I think original fans will be very pleased, is that the recurring characters of the kind of legacy show. So to begin in part, we have Jeri Ryan returning as Seven of Nine, as was in Voyager. She was very popular, and she was obviously a very sexualized character. We all know she was brought in at the time to kind of reinvigorate the ratings of that show, but later on she became a much more of a substantial character, because she was a form of artificial intelligence with the Borg, and she was adjusting more to interacting more with humans and developing more her consciousness and her own human emotions, and you see her developing relationships with various characters. So she became a lot more of a popular character as she went on. And Jeri Ryan, she still looks great. I think she's in her 50s now. She looks fantastic throughout the show, and the direction they put her in now is she's much more of this kind of rogue kind of character, and you see she's got different personal motivations, the death of her loved one, and she has this kind of revenge mission at the beginning of the show, and then she aids the heroes later on, and she's great. She's just fantastic throughout the show. We have kind of Commander Riker returning, and again he looked great when he's put back in his uniform and he arrives with the fleet later on. The great scenes that they had, I think it was in episode 7, the Penthe, when Picard goes to their planet and he reunites with Riker and Deanna Troi. You get a great scene of them huddling together, and those scenes are always going to hit you as a Star Trek fan. If you're a fan, especially of the Next Generation, it's just great to see these old characters coming back together. And what's good is that the actors who played them, they still inhabit the same kind of spirit and aura about those characters. If you're going to have these recurring roles, it's always critical that the actors who played them previously can still pull it off. And all of these characters, they did it great. Jonathan Frakes, Martina Sirtis, Brett Spiner as Data, they all did a fantastic, great job on there, right? So that was always great to see these legacy characters coming back together. If we look at Star Wars, it was always a regret that we never got one scene with Han, Luke and Leia back together as a force on there, right? So yeah, it brings back those nostalgic feelings, and that was great. They did that very well in the show. So I think a lot of that worked, and again, kind of the legacy characters becoming involved with Picard, just gave it that sense, again, of a bit more gravitas and a bit of kind of significant meaning. And even if you weren't a fan of these characters, those scenes I think worked very well. So those are really the main good points throughout the season. Now we're going to go on to the bad points, and I think the first main flaw of this show was the plot narrative, and it was really kind of all over the place. The show kept changing the goalposts throughout. So in the beginning, we're with Picard and he wants to connect with Data, and then he wants to help Dawes, who is under attack from these various Romulan groups, right? So that's what we're focused on here. And then later on, as we find out about Starfleet abandoning the Romulans when they were supposedly attacked by the synthetic beings, and Starfleet abandons them, if you like, and we get a theme where we want to kind of save the Romulans, look after them. We have that episode where Picard walks into the bar and he's surrounded by Romulan refugees, and he's making these speeches about, we made a mistake and we can still help you. And then we change again when we get this whole mythological tale about this super synthetic being and how we need to stop them, and maybe the Romulans aren't the enemy. And then we change again when we actually find out that the synthetic beings are the enemy. They want to destroy all organic life on Earth, and the simps want to introduce them into kind of the universe to destroy everybody. And basically the Romulans, who were the enemies at the beginning, were actually proved to be right in the end. So the narrative just kept changing throughout. And if you're going to have a show that's a very long running show, 10 episodes, 20 episodes, you want to have a long running arc. You can have subplots in between, that's fair enough, that's fine. But if you have a long focused arc that you can jump in and say, right, this show that characters are trying to save this planet, or they're trying to defeat this enemy, or they're trying to go on this mission, you have that central focused running arc. It always kind of keeps you on track, and then you can venture off each episode into the various subpoints, but we know the central focus. So for example, Walking Dead, right, the main focus is that we want to defeat the Whisperers, right? The main focus in Black Lightning is that we want to defeat the occupation of the ASA and the Markovians, right? That's your central focus. And Picard never have that. So because you don't have that focus, you become less engaged and less compelled to the storyline and the season overall. Sometimes I was just tuning out because I'm thinking, what are we doing here? What are we really aiming for? What are we really trying to achieve? As the series is still trying to find its feet. Okay, so that was one flaw. Another flaw, I think, was the whole issue, I think, of bad movie making habits and, you know, television production with series and modern day filmmaking. So what do I mean by that? So as we know, if you look at a lot of modern movies and modern television series, so much is focused on the aesthetic, right? Where you have tons of lens flare everywhere and bright lights and, you know, multiple angles, and everything's in this filtered shiny HD, and you have all this shaky cam, and everything is just happening at you quick all over the place. And I think a lot of this is down to where you have maybe inexperienced filmmakers or directors, and then they're so worried that if you tell a more classic structured storyline where basically characters are in one room, they talk about this thing here, move to the next room and talk about this thing here, move to the next room, talk about this thing here. If you tell it in a much more linear way, they're a bit worried that the viewer is going to get bored, right? Because supposedly today's viewers, we have kind of low attention spans, right? So they do all these gimmicks, like I said before, lens flare, bright lights, lots of action sequences, all these gimmicks just to kind of keep you engaged, and they think they're going to keep your attention to the storyline. But I think it can have the opposite effects, right? Where if you've got so much going on thrown at you, you become disengaged with the storyline and what's going on and the action sequences, right? Because there's too much distracting you away from what's going on. Star Trek Discovery was guilty of this a lot, and also the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies and the Justin Lin one as well. They were all guilty of this same thing, when everything's moving at such a frenetic pace, kind of in your face, and you just lose track of where you are. And Picard is the same thing, right? They did this thing that I found very frustrating, where characters are in a room together and they talk about a certain order of events, or they talk about a plan of action. And what they would do is they would have one moment when they're talking about the action, and then they'd flip to when the action actually happens. They'd flick back again to when they're talking about the plan, and then they flick back again to when the action or event is actually happening. And you just keep fast forward, back and forth, and you kind of like, what's going on? What are you trying to tell? What part of the story are you really going at here? There are a couple of examples. We had it in the, I think it was in the second episode, when you had Picard and one of his Romulan carers, and they were talking about what happened to Dash when she was attacked by the Romans. They're kind of investigating the event. So they start off by them talking about what's happening, and they flip forward to when they actually go to her room where she was attacked, and they keep going back and forth, and everything's doing at different angles, and you've got musical score all over the place, and it just takes you out of the action. There was another scene, I think it was the 6th episode, when we have that operation when they're doing the fancy dress and they need to infiltrate that bar, because this is when we introduce 7 of 9, right? And this could have been a really fun escapade. This actually where a lot of the shows would have had this as an individual episode on its own, where you'd see them carefully putting on them costumes and trying them on and then execute the plan. But again, they're putting on the costumes here, flick back to the plan, putting in the costumes here, flick back and forward. And, you know, it takes away the fun out of it, because you're not enjoying what's going on. You're just wondering what's going on, if you like, in a many way. There was another episode, I think in episode 10, where they capture Narek and they want to infiltrate the synth base, And again, they talk about their plan and what they want to do, and it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and just let us see the order of events. Let them see the actual structure of the plan take place. You know, you look at, like, say, Ocean's 11. What made that movie work is because we got to know the characters, got to know what they were wanting to do in terms of the heist, and then we saw the heist actually take place. Right, Jackie Brown's another great example of this. You know, if you get involved in the characters first, get to know the scheme, and then when you see the scheme kind of run in a kind of real time kind of element, you're more hooked because you think, right, if that element doesn't work, it might fail here. Our heroes might be trouble if that doesn't work. That's how you generate, I think, suspense and tension. And Picard just didn't have that because it kept doing this kind of shortcut storytelling, quick edits here all over the place, right? So that was another fault on there. You know, again, that same kind of hectic aesthetic that Star Trek Discovery had as well. So another thing where I think hurt the show, and this is quite a big factor, was the supporting characters. And sadly, I think they just came across as very weak and very thin. You know, they just lacked a bit of substance, and, you know, they didn't really get you invested in what these characters. It was not the fault of the actors or their performances, because they could only act as what per the roles that were written to them. Okay, so if we go through the characters, we had Rios, who was kind of this kind of butch kind of swagger pilot in the ship. He owns the ship. He's introduced, he has this shrapnel in his shoulder, and he's just carrying on, and he's drinking his alcohol, and we have these multiple holograms of him again. I don't know why they chose to do that. Maybe just to give the actor more material to work with, I don't know. But we get initial insight of him because he was working with a captain who had to kill a couple of synthetic beings, and he was tortured by that, so he ended up committing suicide. So Rios was tortured by that. So we had a kind of reference to that, but then we never go back to it again, right? So we kind of lose any kind of connection we have with Rios, even though the actor himself gave a good kind of charismatic performance. He just never really stuck enough. We have Raffi, who was a former Starfleet officer working with Picard. When they were trying to initiate rescuing of the Romulans, Starfleet didn't like that, and as a result, Raffi got dismissed. So when we catch up with her, she's on the caravan and she's drinking alcohol, just like Rios. You know, it's a running theme throughout this show that many characters deal with their issues by what they drink, right? And again, we get an insight to when she visits the planet to try and reconcile with her son, who she's been abandoning for a while. And we get that moment, but then we just pull away from it and we don't go back to it again. Raffi never refers to it again, even at the end when they kind of achieve the mission and you think, right, I want to go back and kind of reconcile with my son again. She doesn't. She just forgets about it completely, right? So again, any potential emotional weight to add to this character, you just didn't give. It was just that one scene, and then that was it. We also have Jurati, who again was a very kind of socially awkward, very frail character. She wasn't really kind of sure what she wanted to be, who she wanted to do. She was very critical to the storyline because obviously she killed Bruce Maddox, who was responsible for creating these synthetic beings, and she was under the influence of Commander O, who have kind of instilled to her the prophecy of what would happen if these synthetic beings took over. So she was very tortured by that, and of course she had a kind of tracking device on her that the Romulans were following, and she kind of, poisoned herself or shut herself down so they could stop tracking her. So one minute she's working with the heroes, and then she does a kind of about twists when she's working with the simps, but then she's really working undercover again to help Picard. So again, she's kind of symbolic of the show, not really sure where she is as what she's trying to do on here. We also have Elnor, who is kind of part of this Roman refugee kind of camp that Picard encountered earlier on. And then as a boy, he was growing up, and he has this kind of protective role to save Picard. And again, the decisions he makes when he's with Picard, but then he does other situations when he leaves Picard. And again, he came across as really kind of whiny and immature. They tried to build kind of connections with him in Seven of Nine, but that didn't really work as such. So again, he just came across as really paper thin character. We have other characters such as Narissa and Narek, and it was very strange here because they were part of the kind of Romulan undercover plot, if you like, operation, and they have this really weird kind of sexual incestual relationship, and it's more really coming from her side rather than Narek's side. And you know, I can't lie, the actress who plays the Peyton List, very stunningly attractive. Larissa, just very stunningly hot she looks, but there's no real depth to her character either. She's just more of a kind of typical femme fatale. She's a very sexualized character. So the relationship dynamic between them was very weird. Didn't really work. Narek himself, we find out, was kind of the member of the family that was ignored or abandoned as such, but we don't really feel the weight of him. And again, he's another one who changes motivations late on in the game. You know, one minute he's manipulating Dorj, and then they try to empathize with him a bit more with his relationship with Nerissa, and then he kind of changes motivations at the end, and he wants to work with the heroes near the end. So you're just never convinced. Commander O was another one who we see her at the beginning. She's giving instructions to Nerissa what to do, but then she kind of comes out of it afterwards, right? We don't really see her again till near the end, where she's kind of leading the Romulan fleets, and we just don't get enough about her. You know, she really should have been one of the main villains, if you like, throughout the show. But again, she just flips in and out of the show. We don't really get enough time to touch base on her and get to grips with her character as a whole. We also have Darsh, the main kind of daughter character of Data, and we think about it, she's kind of three characters. One a time when she's Darsh, then she ends up being rediscovered as Soji, and then we get an alternate version of her with Sutra, who again is a much more of a sexualized character. And Sutra herself, she had a main threat and a main aura about her, but then when it turns out later, when Dr. Song finds out that she killed one of the simps, he just turns her off. So any threat level or danger level she had is just gone, right? Just eliminated. So you're like, okay, that character didn't add up to much in the first place. So there was too many characters that really didn't stick the landing, really didn't develop themselves kind of overall. And I think one big aspect of the Star Trek franchise throughout, if you look at all the series and all movies, they really have a distinctive array of supporting characters that could carry certain episodes on, or certain story arcs on their own. You know, you look at the classic original series, you know, you had Spock and McCoy and Uhura and Scotty, and then Next Generation, of course, you had Troy and Riker and the LaForge and Worf and Data, and then Deep Space Nine, which I thought one of the best examples when you had a really diverse array of characters. Whether it was Odo as a shapeshifter, you had Kira, who, you know, was Bajoran, you had Miles O'Brien, it was a really kind of fiery captain, you had, of course, the stunning Jadzia Dax, you know, you had Quark as well as more kind of the comic relief. So you really had this huge array of supporting characters. That's kind of been the foundation of Star Trek, right? But you know, even Star Trek Discovery, you know, when you had Stannis or Saru or Captain Lorca or Captain Pike, you know, even Tilly, even though she wasn't my favourite character of that show, she was still more substantial as a supporting character than a lot of these characters in Star Trek Picard. And anytime Picard wasn't around and he had to rely on these supporting characters, it just didn't work as well, because I didn't feel a good enough connection between them. Again, nothing wrong with the performances, it was down more to the writing. So that's where I think, you know, it failed again, unfortunately. Now, another big aspect where I think was most notable was something that I think a lot of fans took issue with, and I agree with, was the whole foul language and violence, right? You know, if you look at Star Trek, right, it's one of those franchises when, you know, because it's been so beloved and so many people connect to it, it's really kind of an institution, along with your Star Wars, your Doctor Who, you know, etc. And these franchises, there's a certain kind of standard or code, if you like, of elements that we come to expect and we're used to with these franchises, right? There's a certain tone and direction that we stand for, right? And that's how people can really identify with them. And Star Wars, you know, in comparison particularly to Star Trek has always been kind of this more, I don't want to say, yes, more adult orientated, maybe more mature, because Star Wars has always been more science fantasy, if you like. But Star Trek has always been more about the thematic subject matter, as opposed, if you like, to the action beats and the spectacle, right? And we expect Star Trek characters to speak in a certain way and behave in a certain way. There's a certain etiquette and a kind of behaviour that we expect for them. And one of those is that we don't really expect them to swear or use a lot of profanity or use a lot of violence, right? I think the whole point of the vision of Star Trek, it was meant to be this kind of utopian kind of science fiction ideal, right? Where we're trying to avoid war, we're trying to build and bring all these different cultures together and find a common ground where we can all coexist together and not fight each other and not be antagonized against each other, right? So when we go to Star Trek Picard, and Star Trek Discovery was guilty of this as well, and we're constantly seeing all these, F-bombs and, violence everywhere, characters getting beheaded and stabbed and eyes ripped out and stuff, and you're thinking, this is so unnecessary. It doesn't feel like Star Trek, right? And to be fair, there's no F-bombs in every single episode, but think, why are there F-bombs at all? We don't expect the characters of any Star Trek franchise to kind of speak using profanity. There were so many scenes, you had the classic Admiral when she's talking to Picard, and the classic quote of the series, the sheer effing hubris and all this, and you think, why are you using terminology like this? It doesn't add anything. It doesn't make it more exciting or more tense or more dramatic, right? And I understand, and this is going off a bit of a tangent, I understand that when you want to continue these franchises, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, the DCU as well, you want to try and modernize it and bring in a new, younger audience. And I know that today's culture, we're used to very dark, gritty, adult orientated shows. So whether it's Game of Thrones or whether it's Walking Dead, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Orange is the New Black. We look at the Marvel shows, in particular the MCU Netflix shows, Daredevil, Luke Cage, Jessica Jones, how much more adult orientated they were from the MCU movies, right? And yes, we're in this kind of dark, gritty take. We want more heroes to be flawed and deconstructed, if you like, but that doesn't always fit for certain franchises, right? And I don't think that kind of tone and direction, that really dark, kind of nihilistic tone, is a fit for Star Trek, in my opinion. You can still have a serious storyline. You can still hype up the threat and the danger and the peril and the jeopardy, and that's what you want, right? Something where you can take the story seriously. Yes, of course, that's what you want, right? But to just have these, I just think the dark tone, and it's just out of place. And you watch the show times and you think, am I really watching Star Trek? Am I really watching another show, a different show? It just felt a bit out of place and just not right. Just kind of left a bad taste in your mouth sometimes, just watching these shows, and just think it was unnecessary. And again, I said Star Trek Discovery was also guilty of this. I think that was even worse, because in Star Trek Discovery you were having this kind of scenes where we had this kind of weird kind of sexual rape, body assimilation type with the Klingons, and Star Trek Discovery, again, that dealt with scenes when you're ripping out people's eyes. I don't know why these shows, they have this obsession with taking people's eyes out. I don't know why. But yeah, I just thought the violence and language is unnecessary, particularly with Star Trek. This is where I think a lot of the backlash is coming from, because in trying to bring in a newer audience, you're kind of changing the tone and taking away the very soul of what these franchises are about, right? Which angers the original fans, and I agree with that. And again, this goes across all themes. I look at as well, particularly Star Wars and how they handled Luke Skywalker, and the DCU and how they handled Superman. You're taking away the very embodiment and identity of what these franchises stand for in order to relate yourself to new audiences, right? What you want to do is retain the kind of soul and the essence of what makes Star Trek, but at the same time added a bit more modern elements. So I mentioned before the visual elements. You can have those modern, really state-of-the-art effects and action sequences, but still retain the soul of what makes Star Trek. And I think if you can get that balance right, you can please both the original fans and the newer fans. And I just think this whole dark tone just to me just didn't work. And especially when you deal with Picard, who I think many fans, because it's Picard, were expecting a much more of an upbeat, optimistic kind of tone, and they didn't really get that. So that's what I think really hurt the show as well. So the last element I think didn't work was just constant illogical events and moments throughout. So one of the things that bugged me a lot was Elnor. He says his main motivation was to look after Picard and save him. They're in the Borg cube. Picard and Dulce teleport away or transport away. Elnor has opportunity to go with them, but he doesn't. He stays on the Romulan cube. The Borg cube on his own for seemingly 2-3 episodes on his own, no one helping him. What did he do? Did he stay awake all that time? How did he eat? How did he drink? And he's just fighting off Romulans on his own. Like, what was the point? You could have easily gone with them, right? But you chose not to, right? Seven of Nine comes in, somehow we know how big the Borg cube is, but Seven of Nine is able to find Elnor straight away. Okay, she's been integrated with the Borg before, yes, but still, she's only one person, and that was a very different Borg cube under the kind of occupation of the Romulans. But Seven of Nine is still able to infiltrate it out of nowhere and find Elnor straight away. How did that happen? How are we able to do that? Again, with Narissa, it seemingly looks like she's assaulted and captured by the Borg soldiers. We see a beam of light, assuming she's transported away, but then we later on find her in the Borg cube on her own, trying to activate the weapon systems, right? Why wasn't she detected? Why didn't she go back and transport to the original Romulan fleet with Commander O, right? She just pops out of nowhere. Doesn't make sense, right? We have other scenes, again, when we go later on, and when Picard has the final scene with Data. Again, that was one of the best scenes of the series, I think. And when Picard dies, they're somehow able to retain his brain neural energy and contain it and then put him into another body. They put him into a 90-year-old body. Why not put him into a younger body? And he thinks someone with a much more physically capable body and Picard's wisdom and experience would be a true asset to the team. I know why it's Patrick Stewart. We understand he's the main character and the actor of the show, right? But logically, you just think you'd put the younger body with Picard's wisdom, right? And that would make a much more, capable character. Why didn't they do that, right? It doesn't make sense. And there's just all these kind of illogical situations, the fleet showing up out of nowhere. They didn't listen to Picard, who was this revered admiral, but they listened to Riker, who was kind of semi-retired, right? Well, really retired, really. But he's able to just command a ship just like that. So they just listened to Riker straight away, right? He's a lot less established, right, than what Picard is. He's been out the game, or he's been living on this planet with Deanna and their kid, right? But he's able to just go back into Starfleet and just command a starship with a huge amount of fleet of ships. Just like that, just out of nowhere. They appear out of nowhere. No one notices the energy signals or the warp signatures, if you like. They just come out of nowhere, right? All of a sudden, Jurati has got this device where she can just generate holographic images. All of a sudden, again, she just come out of nowhere. Again, no rhyme or explanation or any reasons from that. And there were just too many kind of illogical moments. And you're just thinking, how did that happen? When did that happen? How did you get there? Why are you doing this? Why are you changing your motivation? It was just too much throughout. Jurati kills Maddox, but then later on we trust Jurati to look after certain people when they're sick again or ill again, so we just completely forget that Jurati just murdered someone. We never refer to it again. We also had at the end of the episode, another controversial point for many people was when we see Seven of Nine and Raffi just holding hands at the end in a very affectionate manner, right? Giving the indication that there's some sort of lesbian relationship. Again, completely out of the blue, we've had no indication of that. If anything, there were more indications that maybe we're going to see maybe potential relationships with Rios and Seven of Nine, or maybe Rios and Jurati. really, Rios could have a connection with all of them. We know he had a connection with Jurati, right? Relationship. Again, Jurati kills Maddox, is very distressed. Within the next episode, she sleeps with Rios. Seven of Nine and Raffi holding hands, being in a lesbian relationship, just out of the blue, out of nowhere. Just where was that hinted at? It doesn't matter that they're in a lesbian relationship. It doesn't matter. If you want to have that, that's fine. We had that a lot in previous series, I think notably in Deep Space Nine with Jadzia Dax, right? So lesbian relationships or same-sex relationships don't matter. We had that as well with Stannis and the Doctor in Star Trek Discovery. So it doesn't matter same-sex relationship. It's just there's been no development to that, right? You're just throwing these things just in it, so they just become much more of a token gesture, right? So you're not trying to build relationships or character dynamics. You're just doing this to kind of what we'd call virtual signaling. And you're just asking why is that happening, and you shouldn't be asking why it's happening. You should be able to just go with the flow and let these characters just develop organically and have everything make sense. So those are all overall points that I think didn't work as well in the show. So considering everything, the good points and the bad, if I were to give Star Trek Picard an overall score, I would have to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I just think Patrick Stewart was great mostly in the role, even though his role kind of diminished later on. And that was another bad point just to mention quickly, is that the lead character just felt less important in the later episodes, to the point where you're like, well, you don't really need Picard, right? All the other characters can do other things. Why is Picard there? You don't really need them at the end. Okay, you make the speech at the end. Another bad point I had was that how the Romulans had this massive motivation to destroy the Simps at the end, yet Picard makes this one speech and everybody just stops what they're doing and goes away. That was another big hang up that I had. But again, Picard's role throughout kind of diminished and he became less important throughout. And I think you have to make him the central focus more throughout the season, right? So that's the challenge, I think, going ahead for season 2. We see them at the end where they're a big group again on the ship. Again, you could ask, why are they sticking together? Why can't they just go on their own paths? But they stick together throughout. And I think for season 2, if we can get a much more of a focused narrative, they're in space now, so you could just give them straight away a set mission to go on to try and generate new villains. You know, we've seen enough of Vulcans and Romulans and Borgs. You know, let's have a new species. Let's have new planets, okay? You know, and give us a new freshness about the show. This is something that potentially Discovery can do as well. Now that the storyline it's set that it's in, you could go venture out into new adventures, right? And let these characters have more room to breathe, and let's cut into them more. Let's cut more into their backstories and give them much more substance away and make us like them and root for them a bit more. Okay, and that's why I think Star Trek Picard could improve a lot more in season 2. So hopefully it will do that. So I understand if you go online, there's a lot of divisiveness, just like there is with Star Wars. Some of it, well, I think actually a lot of it is justified. I think some of it is overkill, but I think, yeah, if you can just work better on the focus of the plot, of the storyline and the characterization, and tone down the kind of heavy aesthetics, the heavy editing and the violence and the dark tone, that might be a good way to get fans back on side. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you like Star Trek Discovery? Did you not like it? Star Trek Picard. Did you not like it? Did you think it was better than Discovery or worse than Discovery? I actually think, being in a minority here, that I think Discovery was a better show than Picard. I'll do that in a separate video, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you looking forward to season 2 whenever it happens with the current scenario that's going on here, or you're not looking forward to season 2, and you just think that Star Trek as a franchise at this point just can't be redeemed, and you've lost faith in the franchise and the showrunners as a whole? So that's my thoughts for now. I'll continue doing seasons reviews and finale episodes as I go along here, but let me know what you think in the comments below. Please like and share, subscribe this video. Take care of yourselves, keep it safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.